Hello and welcome to the Board Game Barrage podcast. My name is Mark, also known as the Green Tank, and I am joined by my tank mates, Neil in the Orange Tank.
Hello, tank mate.
And Kellen, the Red Tank.
Ahoy, tank mate.
No, that's a nautical term. We're not at sea, we're on the ground. I would expect a salute or two. I know that listeners won't see it, but I would appreciate it for myself, like that you would salute the commanding officer, because I'm sort of leading this episode.
Are you an Eagle Scout?
No,
You
I'm
should
not.
be saluting my service. No, actually, I don't think that has anything to do with the Scouts. I think there's humility.
Yeah. Did you get the humility badge?
Yeah. On my honor, I'll do my best to do my duty to God and my country, to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally something, and morally straight.
There you go.
A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent.
Oh, thrifty. I like thrifty in there. I wasn't expecting that. On today's episode, speaking of thrifty, actually not at all speaking of thrifty, we are going to be talking about game end triggers. The different ways we get to the end of the games. We're going to be talking about a number of different types of game end triggers, and we're also going to be answering a question, which was the genesis of this episode, which was sent in by Kyle, who submitted a topic at boardgamebarrage.com/topics, where you can go to suggest a topic to the show. We really appreciate those, as is case in point with this episode. So Kyle asked a question about game end triggers. We're going to review that and maybe give our answers, but that'll be later in the show. Before we do that, we're going to be talking about the games that we have played. Kellen is going to start us off with Robot Quest Arena. I will finally be doing the review of Mr. President, and then Neelan will be wrapping up with a review of Expeditions. Kellen, tell us about Robot Quest Arena, which is a game that I saw Christina take a snapshot of and share on our Discord. What's the backstory? You had forgotten you'd backed this, and all of a sudden it had in the mail?
It came... I said that I had forgotten that I kickstarted this. Or no, that's not true. I'm lying. I said I had accidentally kickstarted this, which she called umbrage to. So Robot Quest Arena is a Wise Wizard Games Kickstarter that is currently in the fulfillment and delivery. I think if you look at any pictures of this, you'll see why I insta-backed it, because it is essentially anime robot mechs fighting each other in a very cute way, arena, and these miniatures are pre-painted. There's not much more that I like in the world than when I hear the words pre-painted, okay? Neelan's up in here, cutting off sprues, sanding off edges, doing all this If this stuff is not pre-painted, it stays gray the whole time I own the game, okay?
I mean, I've moved on to fully metal miniatures now, Ken, but we'll get back to that later.
Oh, you're getting by Stegmeyer. This is what I just heard you say. All right, Robot Quest Arena, and I do encourage you to look at pictures of this because these miniatures are super cute and adorable, is, in a word, good. So I want to caveat that I've only played it at 2 players, which is definitely not the way the game should be played. And I would say that this game is everything that I wanted Robo Rally to be. It is, in fact, well, I mean, it's not a replacement for Robo Rally because it doesn't have action programming, but who the likes action programming, first of all? So this is a fairly traditional deck builder game. It is a Dominion-style, draw 5, use as much as you can on your turn deck, where the energy that you use to buy new cards for your deck is the same energy that you use to move your robot around the arena, which makes for a really great trade-off because it's basically like, do I want to move and hit people, or do I want to buy new stuff for my deck? The market consists of 3 static cards that are always in the market, and then an Ascension-style card market row of 6 cards that sort of rotate through as people buy them. It is a very silly game. Very, very silly. And all of the points that you get are the HP that you take from someone else. So there are attack cards. There are melee cards with a range. Melee is only in orthogonally adjacent range that does 2 damage. And that 2 damage that you do to someone else is given to you as victory points. And the game ends. You basically are on a grid with overlays on top of it. Positioning matters. You're moving around the board. If you're in the center of the board at the start of your turn, you get a victory point. So there's some reason to be in the center. Sometimes you want to be on different parts of the board. Last hitting a character when they die is worth double the victory points. So this is where I don't feel like we got the full game experience, right? Because in a 3 or 4, or with the Kickstarter, 5 or 6 player game, you're going to be trying to last hit the hell out of each other, which I would think would be very funny. And, this is great. Christina and I had a really great time playing Robot Quest Arena. Immediately wanted to play it with other people. There were a couple of little expansions, that add different types of cards, that add like defense cards or cards that attach to your character instead of going immediately into your discard pile. I think it was very easy to teach as a result of understanding the scaffolding of Dominion, because it's like, yeah, of course, when you buy a card, you don't immediately get it. It goes into your discard pile, and then you shuffle, and then, all of those sort of things. So without that framework, I do wonder, because for me, this feels like immediately like a King of Tokyo and a Robo Rally type killer, because deck building is just so much more fun. But I do imagine there's going to be some gang up on the leader stuff. It's a little bit bitty for what it is, but it's also quite adorable. I was very impressed with this, very excited by it. What do you guys want to know about Robot Quest Arena?
Yeah, it's a shame because my first impulse is, and not to say that it sounds like it's that similar, but what you were describing about like last hitting immediately reminded me of like Adrenaline. But I know you've not played that, but this feels like probably the cuter, simpler, I guess more deck buildery version of that sort of just like, free form shooter arena type system.
Yeah, it's really like draw 5 cards. Oh, I have 4 energy. What's in the market for 4? Or should I use that to move 2 and then use my attack card to hit someone? So it's dumb and silly and fun, but quite good. And the aesthetic is super nice. Card quality is good. The whole thing just feels like fun to me in a way that, I don't know. It's fun to have good, lighter games. Actually, it's funny. The Kickstarter is just all of the BGG images are just like pictures of the models, which doesn't bode well. But it like just delivered. I wonder, without the pre-painted miniatures, it's good. I think you should both try it. I think you would both enjoy it.
Yeah, it looks adorable, and the early reviews seem to be quite glowing. So I'm happy to hear that you seem to agree with it. How's like a mechs versus minions look? I don't know if you mentioned that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that.
Yeah. This review, relentless shots of dopamine to the brain. I don't know. That sounds like hard drugs. Everyone also has a character power. And there are some other systems. It's not that simple. There's pushing and, you can be on top of stuff that you want to be on or don't want to be on. There is line of sight, which, never works. But explaining line of sight to Christina was actually kind of interesting because I'm sure she's used it in other games. But here she was just like, what are you talking about? Line of sight. And I was like, well, just pretend you're in the middle of the square, and then draw a line from the middle. And I'm like, haven't we figured this out yet, guys?
Yeah.
No, we haven't. That is Robot Quest Arena. Something definitely people should check out, and one that I'm going to bring to a couple of upcoming game nights and hopefully get played in sort of the first game of the night kind of slot.
Yeah, I look forward to playing this. It seems cool as hell.
Agreed. All right. So before I get into the review of Mr. President, I want to start out with a caveat here. I'm only halfway done with my first game of Mr. President. Probably doesn't come as a shock, but usually in this game, you're meant to play out at least 4 years of your administration, potentially less if you get impeached, potentially more if you get reelected and you want to play 4 more years. And I just wrapped up my second year of my administration. So
and then you were assassinated.
That's right. That's right. I wonder if that's actually possible in this game. It could be. There's a lot of things possible. So how could I think I was possibly qualified to review a game that I haven't even played once, much less multiple times? Well, I'm actually not sure I am, so take everything that I say with a grain of salt. On the other hand, playing half of one game of Mr. President has taken me 2 weeks, though that's an unfair way, to be fair, to quantify it, since I haven't been playing it straight, obviously. But I will say that I think I've played what amounts to probably, if you added it all up, 8 to 10 solid hours of this game. So while I definitely am not an expert, I think that I at least have a firm sense of what the game is and what it has to offer. So what is Mr. President? Mr. President is one of the newest games from GMT, and this was a review copy provided by them. and a design that spanned, I think, 7 years by the head of GMT, Gene Billingsley. I have to say that for whatever reason, I had no idea that this game was in the works, though apparently a lot of people did. I guess it was part of the GMT P500 system for years now. Anyway, I'm glad that I had no idea because the sales pitch of this game is right up my alley, and I can't imagine waiting with bated breath for 7 years for a game. So that's fortunate. In Mr. President, you're playing the President of the United States sometime during the years of 2001 to 2020. That specific dating is mainly there to sort of frame the kinds of issues you're going to be dealing with. You're not playing as any specific president during the time, but you'll be dealing with things both domestically and internationally that happened or might have happened in the world during that time span specifically. So no space race or anything that might have been a big issue outside of that time. I think I can fall into a trap of whenever I do a game review here is to get too caught up in the minutia of how turns work and whatever little mechanisms are in a game. I think that's a general problem that I have on the show, but this will not be a problem in my review of the description of Mr. President. The game is just way too broad in scope to even try to explain in very much detail here, but I'll try to paint it in broad strokes. So first, let's talk about the board, or more accurately, the boards. You've got two main pretty much full-size boards that you're going to lay out next to each other, one depicting the global international situation, which focuses on different parts of the world, and the other on the domestic situation, such as like the state of your cabinet, your relationship with Congress and with the media, how bills are faring in Congress. But that's not all. There's also two mini boards. One holds some of the 650 chits that are in this game, and the other one which is tracking the state of global wars. So as I said, unless you get booted, you're going to be playing 4 years of your administration. Each of the 4 years is basically split up into 6 phases, okay? There's the beginning of the year, there's the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, and then end of year. So you're going to do that 4 times. Now, this isn't strictly a game where you can say on your turn, you can do this, this, or this. Because the way it works is that each of those 6 sections that divide up a year are further subdivided into an order of things that you need to resolve. For example, in this first phase of the year, the beginning year phase, you're going to start by doing some cleanup. Then you're going to give a State of the Union speech to Congress. Then you're going to check the impact of the state of the U.S. economy. Then you're going to set your administration's focus for the rest of the year in terms of like what bills you want to get passed. So every time you start a new year, that's what you're going to be doing in that order. The same goes for each quarter. For example, the start of the first quarter starts with checking how one of your major peers, which are Russia and China, what actions they're doing, and then going down a list, doing a number of different specific things quarter after quarter throughout the rest of the year. That's not to say that there isn't any latitude in what you can do. There are many phases that you're going to encounter where you're going to be told to take some number of actions, and it's sort of open-ended. Sometimes specifically the actions need to be like domestic or diplomatic or military, but sometimes it's just up to you as to what you want to do. I haven't mentioned this yet, and this is obviously crucial, but this is a solo-only game. And there isn't exactly a win condition. If you make it out after your 4 years, you're going to total your score, which comes from a lot of different places, with one of the major contributors being your approval rating, which is another thing that's tracked, and see how you fare against presidents throughout history. So, if you have a high score, you might be there at the top with the number 1 president, Abraham Lincoln, or if you do less well, all the way down at number 18, James Buchanan. And yes, there are only 18 rankings, not 46 as you might expect, since none of the presidents that you're ranked against are since 1960.
Well, that would be super aggro if they were like, are you as good as George Bush, or are you more of a Bill Clinton?
Right.
And then one of those is better than the other?
Yes, very, very, very true.
Oh,
and
that would be really funny. You should make the list, Mark.
Yeah, maybe I will. That's a very important thing to bring up here, is that this game takes great, great pains to be nonpartisan. In addition to the lack of references to modern presidents, all the bills, for example, that you're going to pass are given generic names like immigration reform or healthcare bill without stating a position. So whatever that healthcare bill is, you can do whatever you want in your mind in making the narrative about it. So back to the game. So that's quote unquote the win condition. There are 14 loss conditions. You can have too many wars going on around the world. You can have nuclear proliferation, a number of different things that can trigger the end of the game.
What's the weirdest one? Like the UFOs show up?
No, I don't think there's anything super weird. I mean, there's 14, so I can't remember them all, but nothing outlandish. I guess maybe you being impeached would be the one like outlier sort of crazy one. And so you're going to try to avoid those conditions and try to rub shoulders with Abe by monitoring the situation basically everywhere. This comes in plenty of forms, but primarily through playing cards that represent things that can happen throughout the world and that you'll have to deal with. So that's one of the things that happens in the game. Sometimes these cards stick around, and if you don't address them, they can get worse and worse. This also comes in the form of plenty of chart checking and dice rolls that you're going to be doing. So let's talk about that chart checking. Again, there's a lot of it. There are literally 10 books that come in this game, multiple rule books, and multiple books of charts to see what happens. Lots of die modifiers, and as I said, dice rolling to see how things play out. And that dice rolling comes without that much mitigation. Now, let me be super clear here. There definitely is dice mitigation, but that mostly comes in the form of getting things in general in a position where they're most advantageous to you, which makes your dice checks easier. Also, you have a resource of action points that you can spend once per roll to re-roll most of your checks. But that is a very, very precious resource that you want to hang on to, and you must keep the second dice roll. So you can't keep spending action points to make sure you succeed. Speaking of, there are a lot of elephants or donkeys in the room when it comes to talking about this game, but let's talk about one of the biggest ones, those rule books. So, like I said, there are multiple in this game, and the game is weighted according to BGG as a 4.2 out of 5, so seemingly ultra heavy, which understandably scares a lot of people off. I'm here to tell you that the unbelievable thing about this game, which is full of unbelievable things, is it isn't really that bad at all when it comes to the weight. I know it sounds crazy given everything I've said. And in fact, I think I might have mentioned this on an earlier episode, maybe the last episode or the bonus episode. But the way that they recommend you play this game is basically set it up and just start playing it. And that works. And the reason that it works is every step of your turn, every turn you take, all these phases are listed out in this really well-built flip book, which is going to be the main sort of manual you're going to be consulting, that takes you through exactly what you need to do in every single phase and subphase of the game. And it's written in a way where you basically don't need to know anything else. All you need to know is like what phase you're in, and everything you need is right there. You don't need to consult other things until it tells you to. I think that most people can relate to this, but sometimes I'll learn a game, play it with people, and when I get asked to play it again, like even a few days later, I feel like, oh my gosh, I have to totally refresh myself. I've forgotten the rules of this game. I have gone literally days between turns of Mr. President and have absolutely no fear that I'll forget the rules when I get back to it, just because of how well that part is laid out. I never have any anxiety of like, oh man, I need to refresh myself on how this works. No, I just know, consult the flipbook, it'll tell you exactly what you need to do. There's so much more that I could talk about, but I'll wrap it up here. So let me start with the main con. So this game has 650 chits that you're going to need to punch out and set up each time. It has 10 books. It has 4 boards, as I mentioned, that someone measured, and it works out to something like 60 inches by 30 inches to fit it all, if you're going to get it all on one table. So you're going to need like a dinner table. The 8 to 10 hour playing time suggestion that's on the box strikes me as quite conservative. The setup itself is probably going to take you an hour. I think it took me just over that. I think maybe you could cut that down to 45 minutes if you really knew what you're doing, but I mean, you're not going to speed set this up. So those are potentially a lot of legitimate red flags. And if that seems to be not your thing, I would say that this is likely not a game for you. Probably. Okay. Probably. I say probably because I think the way this game is best played is the way that I'm doing it, frankly, which is I'm fortunate enough to have
the best way to do this is Mark's way.
Yeah.
That's right, Mr. President.
Put that on the back of the box. Okay. I'm fortunate enough to have a table we don't use that's sort of tucked away in the corner. I have the game all set up and I just go over and take a couple turns whenever I'm free. Frankly, I have a hard time seeing this game played any other way. I mean, like the idea of playing this all in one sitting strikes me as really less than ideal. I mean, just sitting there by yourself for 8 to 10 hours, the sort of situation which generally is like great for a big convention game, like these big Twilight Imperium 4 games where it's going to take you 6 to 8 to 10 hours. Those are usually convention games, but it doesn't work for that because it's a solitaire game. Not that you couldn't do it in one sitting, but taking your time with this really, really works for me. So who is this a game for? Okay, obviously you need to be okay or interested in playing solo games. That's obviously going to be a big thing. And just as obviously, it's probably going to help if you have an interest in history or politics. I think that's probably a must need. But as I mentioned earlier, you don't need to necessarily be okay with heavy games because, again, the rules are so carefully parceled out that if that's what's scaring you off, I would say don't let that scare you off. But if you are okay with those things, if you do like solo games or are interested in solo games and you do like history or American politics or whatever, and again, it's not partisan. That doesn't need to be a thing for you. Then I think this game is pretty great. I mean, again, I've had this game set up for 2 weeks now, and that might strike you as like, well, you probably don't really like it because it's taking you so long to play it, but it's such a nice thing to just go over there, take a couple of turns. I've enjoyed it so much, and then feel comfortable stepping away. And again, not having that anxiety of like, okay, when I get back, I'm going to have to like relearn a lot of stuff. I have just been having a great time. Again, not for everybody, but I've loved it.
Mark, can I say something?
Yeah.
Can I read you something?
Please do.
Noun. The phenomenon whereby a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or course of action because they have invested so heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial.
Sunk cost fallacy? Is that what you're talking about?
I didn't say that. Whoa.
Look, I don't think... I mean, in fact, I will even be more strongly about this. I know that's not what's going on here. If this game... Look, I look to the future, and I know that this game is going to take me another 12 hours or whatever. And I would 100% break this game down. Look, I'll be honest here. When I play a game and I know I'm going to trade it or sell it, I will not be careful about putting it away. I'll just throw all that shit back in the box. Okay?
Wow. Be careful if you buy a game from Mark.
Yes, exactly. Look, it's in great condition, but the condition is all mixed up. Nobody's asking me about like where the chits are. So if I didn't like this game, I would just run my hand across the table and throw all those chits in the box and have no concern or anything. But I really enjoy this game. Again,
Yeah, I believe that. You don't strike me as someone that would stick with something if you weren't getting something out of it, it would get abandoned. And I believe that. If this was not giving you joy, it would not still be laid out.
And also, again, as I just mentioned, it's so bite-sized the way I'm doing it that it just doesn't feel imposing to me, you know?
Put that on the back of the box, bite-sized.
Right. But I mean, that's not going to be for everybody. This is like going to be a subsection of people listening or people potentially interested in games. But I think you really do need an extra table. I really don't think that this is a game that you should be like, I'm going to set this up and play it and put it away. As crazy as that sounds, it's just so much easier to deal with doing it this way. And again, that coupled with the fact that you don't need to worry about refreshing the rules or anything like that, it just makes it for a really excellent way to do things. And again, this doesn't necessarily refute the idea that's a sunk cost thing for me, but if you're interested in how my game's going, you can go to boardgamebarrage.com/discord, where I have described in great detail all of my turns and everything my administration is doing. And that's maybe the biggest thing that I haven't even talked about is like, I love the way the narrative works here. The narrative that comes out of this game is just awesome. You have an issue that comes up, and again, some of these cards can reoccur, and so like, you know, this issue you had with China comes back up, and now you have to like deal with it before it starts flaring up. And all these different parts of the world and of the domestic situation are so integrated that you really need to make sure you're balancing everything and putting fires out. It's a perfect game for me. It's a perfect game for me. If I could get this game shaved to half the time, I probably wouldn't do it because you lose the scope. Like if I could lose 2 of the boards, I probably would not take that because, again, I just love the scope. The scope feels so big. It feels like you're the president of the United States. If obviously it's simulation, but it's not not simulated to the part where it feels like super abstracted. You know, obviously it's
you could step in if they needed, if Biden needed to step out for a little bit after doing that. That's right. Exactly. I'm ready to go. But anyway, that is Mr. President by GMT Games and Gene Billingsley. I want to fight you on 2 axes. One, like, I don't like playing this card, but here I am playing it anyway. Like, it takes a whole table. You have to set it up. It's a lot of boards.
Yep.
Like, there are apps and games that are sort of simulations like this.
Yeah.
So you're sort of articulating that, like, you wouldn't even get rid of a board even if you could. Like,
yeah.
The scope and scale, like, you're kind of saying that, like, I like it being a sprawling mess on my big table, which, like, I just fundamentally, like, can't agree with.
Okay.
Or, like, you're saying that, like, I want my boards to be strewn and wild, and that's part of the scope of a board game, or scale of a board. Like somehow that scale, like, manifestation of pieces and physicality and giant-ass boards, like, somehow increases your immersion.
Yes, and I think that is what is happening. Because, look, I would say 99% of situations, that's not what I want. I want things to be, you know, slimmed down. I want things to be quicker. But one of the draws of this game is the scope of it. One of the things I want in this game is, like, I'm affecting the entire world. The domestic thing is huge, and the world thing is huge, and I want this whole big thing spread. It's not analogous exactly, but like it's the same thing as like blinging out or having like miniatures that are extra nice. A big miniature, don't need it. You could use a little acrylic, you could use like a little thing, and that would cut down on the price and would cut down on the space. And I know this is a much blown out of proportion situation, but it's sort of akin to that. In a game about the world, I don't mind it being super big. And I know that is like obviously a very privileged position because like, again, I'm saying you need its own table for it. And a lot of people are, especially in like a place like LA, like you might not have like a spare table or whatever, but that is a part of it. And, you know, there is a digital version, I don't know, maybe it's on Tabletopia or something, which is not like great. Obviously, there's a lot of issues with the physics engine stuff and it being non-intuitive. But like even in games that are digital, for example, there is a digital implementation of Twilight Struggle, and I don't really have any interest in it because, I don't know, there's something that is reduced in just like the clicking on things. And also like the dice rolling, like obviously in a digital game, the dice rolling would be like click the dice to see it roll. And you know, there are some games where you see the dice rolling and that's a cool thing that I've always liked in digital games where you actually see a physical dice rolling. But like I've made rolls in Mr. President, and this game has caused me to break out my dice tray. The first time I've ever done it. I've had this dice tray for 10 years, and this is the first time I ever played it because it just feels like an event that needs a dice tray. But like I'll have a roll and I'll be like, oh my God, this is going to affect the state of the Middle East on this roll. And then I roll it and I won't even look at it. And then I'll slowly like look at it to see what happened. Like I'll roll, the die has been cast and whatever's happened has happened. And then I'll look at it. And it's just like, it just feels like a game that has that drama to it. At least for me. Again, I'm a big time history buff. So this may sound like gibberish, but for me, it's like that scope is perfect. And moving the pieces around is perfect. And you're not moving any armies. So it's not like even that, but just like moving your relationship with Congress and moving your approval rating and stuff. Just moving the stuff is like such a big part of this game.
I think there is like a disconnect that you could, I was going to say we, but then I'll come back to that, but that you could never maybe sell Kellen on, which is, I think we talk about this a lot, like why isn't this a video game version? And even as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about video games that are like this, like we've spoken about football managers that I've really liked. And as you're describing it, especially with your enthusiasm, I'm starting to think like, I would play one game of this. Like, you know, it's I have no interest in like U.S. politics or history or any of that thematically.
Excuse me?
But something about like the grand scale simulation of it does appeal to me when it comes to like moving bits and like the you know, the tactility of that and having it all laid out in front of you like in a physical space. I find that appealing. I know Kellen doesn't. So,
but I think we're conflating like scope. Like scope of gameplay is not. It takes up more table space.
No, but I think that there is something. This is going to be like a dumb analogy, but it's like the difference between like controlling a mech with a controller and controlling one with dual joysticks. You know, like there's something about the tactility of like the scope of it, of like where you see it all laid out in front of you, that there's like this visual physicality to it that makes it feel immense. Like that's not nothing.
I will also say that part of my thing about not wanting two boards to be taken away if they could, I say that with the caveat that I don't know how you could fit everything this game's trying to do if it was half the size. If you tell me like, okay, yes, it's half the size, but everything is still in there. Yes, of course that. Then yes, I would want it to be smaller. And I will say in terms of like the bigness of it, one thing that I do have a little bit of problem with is the 650 chits. It's just, there's so many chits.
Yeah.
I mean, organization is like super key here. So that is one thing. That is definitely one thing I wish could be done. But again, it's hard for me to imagine the game being as big again in scope with trimming things down. I think you could trim 100 chits and probably get away with it, but like in terms of other stuff, I feel like it'd be hard to do.
Yeah, and I think your enthusiasm is contagious, not to the level of I would ever touch this game. It would never happen. But, you know, I don't know that we can get over some fundamental hurdles, which is like, I would say a game with 12 pieces is always better than a game with 650. Like, and I feel like that's 99% true for me. And what you're describing just sounds like really, really inelegant. Again, not that there's an elegance to the chaos. You love it.
Sure.
It's almost like, you know, what is that Marilyn Monroe quote about like, you gotta love me at my worst. Like you're sort of like embracing the like craziness of this, and that's part of it. And I'm like, absolutely don't do that.
I will say that I do not agree with your 16 necessarily better than a lot. I mean, 16 better than 600 maybe. Okay, yeah, 600 is crazy. I will give you that. And this game is certainly not elegant. I mean, I would say the closest thing to elegance is the way that they handle the rules, but even that is quite inelegant, the way that everything is chunked out. But yeah, no, I understand that. I understand that. So that is Mr. President by GMT. And again, this is a review copy provided by GMT Games.
So I'm going to be talking about Expeditions. This is a just shipped out pre-order I did from Jamie Stegmaier and Stonemaier Games, which is being billed as the sequel to Scythe. I think that title is a little bit of a misnomer, but let's get into it. Expeditions is primarily a card tableau game in the guise of like an engine builder. It does have some similarities to Scythe, more than I expected actually after reading the rules, which kind of surprised me. But on a high level, what you are doing is you are one of multiple factions moving out across a hex map landscape. The first row of those will be face up at the start of the game, and the second and third row will be face down. So there's a little bit of an exploration component to not knowing exactly what hex you're moving into, and each of those hexes have different benefits associated with them. On your turn, you're going to take some combination of 3 actions. One is just moving your mech around this board. Dead simple. There's no real substantive blocking. You can move through other players. You just can't end up on the same hex as them. The second action is just taking the benefits of the hex you're currently on. That's gathering. So like I said, these are going to be randomly distributed throughout the map. The third action is playing cards. So this is, I think, where the fundamental, I think, core of the game is, and also what makes it pretty substantially different to Scythe. There are 90 unique cards in this game, and this starts to feel a little bit like Jamie taking Scythe and mashing it with a deck builder. And to his credit, a lot of these deck builder hybrid games are cited in the back of the rulebook as inspiration. So if you think about like the Dune Imperium craze, Clank, Arnak, like there's some core of that here, even though it's masked in a way that's pretty clever in my opinion. So on your turn, you can be playing a card from your hand. You're going to be taking the actions on that card. And that is basically the beginning and end of the action. Those actions typically require workers, so you have to pair cards with a specific color of worker, which you'll get from moving around the board as well. But the thing that's clever about this action system is similar to Scythe. In the way that Scythe worked, you couldn't take the same column of actions 2 turns in a row. In Expeditions, you can't take the same pair of actions 2 turns in a row. So you're going to pick 2 of those actions, but they can't be the exact same 2 actions you took on the last turn. And there's also this process whereby when you run out of cards to play, you take a refresh turn, and then you get a power turn of all 3 actions after that. So that the action selection system feels quite clever in terms of the timing of when you need to take a refresh, when you're going to be moving and then gathering and playing, and so on, in a way that does feel similar to having to take alternating actions in Scythe, for example. So let's get back to those cards. Like I said, this is the core of the changes to the game. This adds a lot of what I would consider like the variability that Expeditions introduces. Scythe does feel fairly rote at times in terms of the scope of what you're able to do. It is ultimately an action efficiency puzzle, and using the actions in the most efficient pattern based on the rest of the board state is the game in Scythe. In Expeditions, it's more about using your cards effectively. You have a very, very thin deck of cards, and to be clear, like, it's barely worth calling it a deck. You start with 2, you will probably get up to like 8 or 10 by the end of the game, but every card has a pretty fundamentally different action associated with it in a way that was kind of cool to see. Like, you're building your card engine towards something that's going to feel very, very different from game to game in a way that I thought was actually a pretty neat thing. The caveat to that, though, is because all of these cards are unique and because there are 5 in what's effectively the market, which is kind of like interlaced with the map tiles at any given time, you're going to be spending a lot of time reading those cards. And this is like kind of a pet peeve of mine. It's the reason I don't like Newsfjord, for example, where it kind of feels like you're spending a lot of time reading cards at the heart of the game. I know that that's probably a me problem. Card tableau games are not generally my favorite. And it also kind of introduces a lot of the downtime in this, where it feels like the game would otherwise move fairly quickly. Like, actions are really snappy. By the time it gets back to you, you probably have a good solid idea of what you're going to do. And because those actions are simple, it's, okay, I'm going to move, gather, next player. And it just kind of goes around like that. But the second anyone needs to look at all the cards in the market, the game just slows to a crawl. Because if you're not just hunting for a specific type of card, which is a big part of the game, there are like 3 primary card types that sometimes you might just be looking for your 4th meteor, for example, then you're just going to be spending a lot of time reading card text, and that's kind of a bummer. The end game, well, fittingly, the end game trigger for this is very similar to Scythe's. So you're putting out these glory tokens, these stars, and once you've placed your last one, that triggers the end of the game. Everyone takes one more turn, and whoever has the most victory points wins. So, I like Scythe a lot. Scythe is one of my absolute favorite games. It's been in my top 20 as long as we've been doing this podcast. I think Expeditions is probably Stonemaier Games' best game since Scythe. I think it's wonky in a lot of ways. I don't love it. I think it's good, but I think Stonemeier's output has been pretty uneven for the most part, to be honest. But I was still surprised, especially after having read the rulebook, and especially in the early parts of the play where I kind of felt that this just didn't really feel like what I wanted out of a sequel to Scythe, quote unquote. But I came around to it a little bit by the end where I kind of felt like it did capture some of what I liked about Scythe. Like having that sort of like action puzzle where you get towards the end of the game, you look across the table and you see like, okay, I think Kirsten's going to be able to end this in 2 turns. So if I can do like a play and a gather, then a gather, a move and a gather, or a move and a play, like I can figure out the way to optimize my plays based on the cards I have in a way that just feels like the most efficient way to either sneak in the victory or get as many points as possible. Because like in Scythe, ending the game doesn't necessarily mean you're winning the game. I do think that it runs into some of the very typical Stonemaier problems, which are kind of around balance, unfortunately. Yet again, like this was a problem with Tapestry. It has the problem that Wingspan has to some extent, where you're kind of just milling through a deck a lot of the time to find a card that's optimal for you. The balance of the cards kind of presents it in ways that feel just kind of obvious to me. Like there are cards that will literally give you a variable number of coins up till a maximum of 3, and then there's another card that just says get 4 coins, and those are the same type of card that can be used in the same way. It just feels like, why is this not corrected? Like, why is this not fixed in ways that just don't feel correct? And that's kind of the sort of general shunkiness that like starts to really annoy me about Stonemaier games a lot of the time. It just doesn't feel like it's kind of finely tuned enough. I also think the game is too long. It's definitely longer than Scythe. A lot of that being because of the downtime of reading those cards.
How long did a game run you, out of curiosity?
The first game of this was probably around 3 hours, I would say. The second game I played of this, and subsequent games were closer to 2 hours, which I would say is also like a product of like player count issues, to be perfectly honest. The game plays 2 to 5, but does nothing to change or mitigate anything about the board or setup, depending on that player count. So I can imagine playing this at 2 is just going to feel like very wide open. Playing this at 5 is just going to feel like very tedious because it just exacerbates the downside problem. And it kind of also like highlights another issue I have in the game, which is they've kind of reduced any and all substantive player interaction that Scythe had. There is no area control in this game. There is no combat. It is almost purely like a multiplayer solitaire puzzle, which I don't mind, except that just compares less favorably to a game that I really, really like. So in all of the ways I start to compare it to Scythe, it just feels lacking to me. I do think that if you are someone that loves card comboing and card tableau engine builders, that there's probably going to be something interesting here for you. But yeah, it's still just not what I wanted.
Okay, I'll bite. Well, I really like card combos.
Sure.
This sort of stuff.
Uh-oh.
But all the combos that Mr. Homeboy has ever made feel really like tame and Eurofied and without any spikiness at all to them. Like I'm reading card actions here and they all feel fairly vanilla, but I don't know the gameplay. Like you can't really interact with each other. So you're milling card combos to like create efficiency chains or what?
I mean, honestly, that's exactly it. It's like a combo that would allow you to take what is effectively like a 5-action turn instead of like a 2-action turn. Like that's the sort of card combo we're talking about. Or a card combo that allows you to, okay, I'm going to move, return this card, play this card, have this activate this other card, therefore I don't have to refresh this turn. Like again, it's saying like, okay, you're compressing 3 turns worth of actions into 1 turn of actions. That's the sort of combo we're talking about. They're not Kellen combos.
Yeah. But would we have fun playing this 2-player?
I would say probably not. I mean, I would say you and I especially not, because it doesn't have any meaningful interaction. It has less at that scale, especially. So let's talk about what interaction there is there, just to be quite clear about it. Like, it is ultimately a race game, so you're obviously racing against the other players. You are blocking spots. These benefits are on a board that you can effectively block, but that never feels intentional. It just always feels like inadvertent. Like, it would probably be very inefficient to go out of your way to block someone. So, yeah, it mostly just feels like you're playing a game amidst other players rather than with them.
Yeah. And still with the shockingly bad typography, which I'm surprised they didn't change.
Also, some really weird, like, iconography and, like, terminology. Okay, well, I have to get this one off my top of my head because it's driving me crazy. The game has a hand of cards. The hand of cards that you play that is not actually cards you hold in your hand. There are cards that you put on the table face up next to the side of your board, but the game still refers to them as your hand. It has a lot of similar stuff where it like borrows deck builder terminology, but doesn't use the same terms in ways that are just really like irritating. Some of the iconography choices are a little bit questionable, but anyway, that's a little bit of a small rant.
This game's better than Wingspan, according to Neelan. Send all your results to.
I think it is. I know that sounds. I know that sounds like I'm sort of rambling and ranting a lot about it. Understand that this was a very anticipated game for me. I think it's good. I do think it's better than Wingspan for my tastes personally. I don't think it's amazing.
Neelan, let me ask you this: what's your favorite part besides the tracing?
It could be the amount of tracing. 90 cards, Kellen. 90 cards worth of tracing.
I wanted you to tell me that we should play this because it's a card combo, like beautiful art. Like that's what I wanted you to say. Like just to be super clear.
I mean, to be clear, like I'm not trying to say that I don't think I'm going to play it again or anything like that. Like I said, it's a good game. Yeah. I like it, and I would like to play it with you. I just don't anticipate you're going to come away moved.
Yeah, like 2 turns in, I'm going to make a face at you, and you're going to know what that face means.
Yeah, exactly. But that is Expeditions by Stonemaier Games.
Before we move on to the main topic, just a quick reminder that one of the great ways to help the show is to give us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you find the show. I'm going to read one out, as we're wont to do whenever we do one of these. Kellen's going to like this one. This is, I think, one of the later reviews. This comes from Australia, from Jauggy, Joggy. And this review is titled Best Board Game Podcast. So already I agree. This is my favorite board game podcast. I discovered them recently and I'm currently going through all their episodes. They're all funny, especially Kellen.
Whoa. Shout out.
My favorite episode of theirs is an old one where they did a top 5 list of bird board games. Not only was Wingspan not mentioned in any of the...
Oh, no, don't tell...
Yeah, I know, it's a spoiler. It's a spoiler. But somehow Biblios made it to number 1 spot on one of them. On one of them... How dare you? I couldn't help but laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. I would say that's not ridiculous. I say that's a scientifically accurate top 5 list we did. Anyhow, keep it up, guys. So that is Joggy from Australia. And if you want to be like Joggy, go to Apple Podcasts again or wherever you found the show and leave us a review. We always appreciate that. It always brightens our day when we see a new one. And if you really want to support us, you could go to BoardGameBarrage.com/Patreon or Patreon.com/BoardGameBarrage and support the show there. We release a bunch of bonus episodes and stuff like that. So that's another way to do it.
Neelan, does it kind of throw a spanner in your works that the Australians prefer me to you?
Not really, because Australians have always been longtime rivals of South Africa, so that tracks. Silly Australians and their terrible opinions.
I'm learning so much about history here.
So you might like Mr. President.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to connect it, and then I was like...
That's good.
Not sure how Mr. President, non-political 2000 to 2020 fit in with the divide between South Africa and Australia.
I think you did a good job. I think
here we are.
I think that was seamless. Anyhow, so let's get into the main topic, which is game end triggers. This, again, was a topic that was suggested by Kyle through a suggestion he dropped at BoardGameBarrage.com/topics, which you can do if you'd like. And Kyle's question is, game end triggers that are determined by the players, player problem or design problem? He says, it seems like I'm playing more games lately where players control how long games last instead of having a defined number of turns or rounds. Most of these games have complaints about them running too long. So is this a design problem or are players not making the best strategic decisions within the game? I feel like it's common for a player in the lead to still focus on maximizing their score, consciously or subconsciously, instead of rushing the end of the game for the win, which actually allows their opponents to catch up. And he goes on, but that's the crux of his question. Do we think that games where the players have control of the game, and is that a design problem fundamentally, or is that a player problem? So we'll talk about that later. But for now, it seems like a good springboard into game end triggers in general and what we think of them, what our favorite ones are. So let's talk about them. There are a couple I think we can talk about and set aside pretty quickly because I think they're the most common ones, which are number of rounds or a target score. I think those are the two most common. I think rounds being the most common, where this game is 5 rounds long, this game is 10 rounds long, and the game ends when everybody has played that many rounds. Or alternatively, another popular one is like first to 50 points either wins or triggers the end of the game. So before we talk about...
I think you're missing, Mark,
Yes.
the philosophical underpinnings of what prompted this discussion.
Okay. I forget those underpinnings. Can you remind me?
That's right. I think that this is a very astute question and observation.
By Kyle.
And I wanted to bring light to the serial position effect.
Please do.
Nealon is squinting at me, but
What?
this is science.
Why are you squinting, Nealon?
I don't get why you're
Colin's
squinting,
position on
Nealon.
this has been
Sorry,
clear.
I had to remind myself what the serial position effect was.
Yeah, I know. You're frantically Googling, but some of us know this off the top of our head. No, this is just the idea or concept that people actually factually remember the first and last things the most, whether they're looking at stories, whether they're looking at lists of things. So there's like the recency effect, the primacy effect. Is that how they say it in South Africa, Nealon?
Primacy, I would guess.
I don't know. Who could say? But no, I do think that it is underappreciated to discuss how the game ends, or how the movie or how the story ends as a way to sort of end cap the whole thing. And we often spend a lot more time focusing on other parts of the game. So I think game end triggers is actually quite a bit more interesting than you might think about at first.
No, I think that's very true. And actually, not to like keep talking about Scythe and Expeditions, but I do actually think it is one of my favorite things about those designs, which is the race, but with the consideration of like, oh God, like I can feel this is about to end and that feels stressful, but now how do I pivot this to my advantage? If I think the game's about to end, how can I capitalize on that fact to like get out ahead? Or do I try to like stretch out the game from ending, which is more relevant in Scythe? But like, I do think that there is something there where it's like, even just like to the question, right, of when you give the control to the players to like dictate the end, are you effectively creating more potentially powerful endings, or are you sort of giving too much power away, I suppose?
And I mean, I think the best games are giving you the illusion that, well, again, not the best games, because, you know, we got a guy up in here who thinks he's the president, but some of the best games, it has this illusion that the game could go on indefinitely, but that the game is actually behind the scenes sort of slowly marching you towards an end of game condition. The one that comes top of mind to me here, which is stolen from Nealon's list, is Inish, which many people claim doesn't do that enough, which is why the game extends too long, and the expansion does a little bit to adjust that. But basically the deed tokens, right, are basically a wild card towards endgame conditions, and players are slowly and continually acquiring them so that you're always more and more on the precipice of winning. So even though it appears like the game could go on indefinitely, it actually is like slowly shrinking the ability for the game to continue moving onward.
It feels like it's not really the same thing at all, but like I always remember thinking that this is one of the things that's quite clever about Azul's endgame trigger as well, where the way that that works is when someone fills out a row, that's the end of the game. But like cleverly, that's not a very optimal way to get points. So there is this like tension between, do you go to trigger the end of the game when you think you're ahead? But similarly, eventually you just start to get so restricted that someone will be forced to fill out a row. So that's not likely to happen. It will probably be somewhere in the middle of those in a way that just feels good.
Yeah, I agree. That seems like a sweet spot between outside of player control and player control. It's like player control, but rushing it or not rushing it is not necessarily a great strategy. It's sort of like in the middle. You have to play your game.
Okay, but let's be reasonable here. Reasonable for a second, which I've done the whole episode. There's nothing worse, okay, than when a game has like the game ends, but make sure everyone has taken equal amount of turns.
Okay.
That is like the most deflating way for a game to end.
Interesting. Okay, so I think there are 3 ways in general where games like this end. So there is, you've hit the trigger and the game ends immediately.
Yeah, that's like how a trigger works, right?
I would argue with that. Then you hit the trigger and then you play it out until everybody gets equal number of turns. And then there's the trigger, equal number of turns, and one more round. Where does that rank for you, Kellen? The one more round?
Even worse.
Even worse. Okay.
Yeah, it's like the crescendo is we're all going to get an equal number of robotic turns. Isn't this fair?
I'm just like staggered by the fact that the Kellen opinion, like the most typical possible Kellen opinion, is that the most mathematically correct way to do things is somehow incorrect.
Stunner. That's a stunner.
Can you repeat that in a robot voice, please?
It's just like, it's such a Kellen take.
It's such a try-hard endgame condition where, like, you know that person is going to be like, but wait, everyone gets the same amount of turns, right? It's so frustrating. It feels, honestly, I'm being totally sincere when I say, like, I think it's a bad end of game trigger, and I think it's very anticlimactic. It's the opposite of climax. Are you familiar with that?
I understand. The more I think about it, I understand where you're coming. No, I do. Because I do think that there is something to be said that, like, what you were saying. Like, is that an exciting end of game? No, probably not. Like, is it the more fair end of game? Probably, yes. That's why we do it that way.
For sure.
But yeah, no, I get it. Like, I do love a game that just ends suddenly. I think that's exciting.
It's even worse when it's a point total and then everyone gets an equal number of turns. Because that feels a little like the Mark Power Grid problem, where it's like you actually only want to hit a certain amount of points when you know that other players won't, and then it feels like you're being told not to pull the trigger, even though you got the gun in your hand.
Right. Even though you're right on the precipice of climaxing, you're asked not to.
Exactly.
Yeah, gotcha. No, I understand.
You end up with somewhat of a mess in your hands.
Okay, so let's talk about real quickly. Let's run through some other types of game end triggers. There's the Ethnos sort of random timing thing. What do you guys think about that? Where you like shuffle a number of cards at the end of a deck. It's out of your hands. It is randomized, but it's a little unclear. I've always sort of like that.
Funny, yeah, that is maybe my least favorite.
Interesting.
Like the random unknown timing. So the one variation of this I like is, this may be in other PAX games, so forgive me, but PAX Pamir, the end of the game is randomly, but you can see it coming. So you get a little bit of anticipation of it. That I don't mind. But when it's just like literally, oh, we drew this card, now the game is over. It's like,
You get that in Ethnos, though, because there's 3 dragon cards that come up. So once the second one comes up, you are like, okay, now it could end.
No, sure. But still, once the third one comes out, that's game over, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I think there's shades of this, right? Because I actually really, really hate it in Ethnos. Because it's just a little bit like you can't control or plan. You just kind of know that it's coming. Right. And then in a game like I'm the Boss.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up,
which has the same thing, but at the end of like the 6th to last round, you roll a die, and then if it's a 1 at the end of that round, it ends. And then you do the next round, and if it's a 1 or a 2 at the end of that round, it ends, and then a 3. So there's like a really clear probability curve. I think it's still a little bit too harsh because being involved in a deal is so important at the end of a game of I'm the Boss. But there is just a little bit more math in terms of what you can calculate there at the end that I find better than just like the cards ran out and I got hosed because there wasn't one more turn in the game, LOL.
Let's talk about another one. What about Archipelago, which is one of our favorite games with the hidden triggers? This is one of the more unique end game systems, and one of the reasons it's
absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, it's really
it's absolutely breathtakingly beautiful, agonizingly beautiful, which is that everyone has a different end game trigger. And everyone has a different way that people score, and then everyone scores based on everyone's card in hand, but only the first endgame trigger matters, which means that you're constantly evaluating what other people are doing. You're constantly looking at what you know won't score because the game would have already ended. And there is that, like, I gotcha looking at everyone and going, is the game going to end when I build this temple? And, like, then everyone goes, and no one flips over, and the game continues. You know, it's almost like literally like waiting for the narrator in Blood on the Clock Tower to tell you that the round keeps going.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because if you didn't, I was going to say exactly that. There is that sense of everyone hanging on, like wondering if it's about to end or not, which I think is a great way to end the game.
Very, very climactic. We are missing, and there are so many more of these, we are missing the end game triggers that are a variable with which like you win the game by way of different endgame triggers happening.
Right.
Which is huge. Big money.
Yeah. There's a version of this that like War of the Ring does specifically where either player can win by one of two different victory conditions. So if you're the good player, you're both keeping your eye on your military condition and the sort of getting the ring to Mordor condition, and evil's trying to do the same thing. So it's almost like two axes that both players are attempting at every point in the game to win by, and I love that when there's like a little bit of a trade-off of which endgame trigger you're going to try push for. Inish is a little bit like that too as well, I suppose.
And it can get pretty wild. Like Archipelago has this where if the game ends and someone is the hidden traitor, like everyone loses, but you actually win. Innovation, my number one game of all time, has this where like if you don't think that you can win with the standard achievements, you can try to sort of shoot the moon, which is draw up past age 10 or 11. And now it's a score pile game, which I adore. Even games like PAX Porfiriana have like quite radically different endgame conditions based on which topple card is out and in play and like which things score. John Company 2nd edition has this as well, which again, to answer the specific question, like I love when there are emergent player driven endgame conditions because like in the case of John Company 2E, I wanted the game to be 2 hours shorter and I got a 2 hour shorter game by taking the shit out of it and I still won the game. I think that ultimately that sandbox is the widest, is the most open, and allows for the most sort of play amongst people. It's often bad for other reasons. Dune historically can also go insanely long, and it's really funny because if no one wins after like I think 12 or 15 rounds, one faction default wins. And so like one faction's goal might be to just elongate the game, which is terrible. You know, and that's bad for, you know, like life purposes. So outside the context of we're playing a game together, like it's bad, certainly, or less clean or elegant as the robots who play Expedition with themselves and don't even need to look at anyone else. They've moved on from birds, the perverts.
You did remind me of another good example of this sort of thing, which is Stationfall, right? Where theoretically the game has X number of rounds, but there are multiple ways where it can end suddenly, and those all feel dramatic and exciting. Like half the times I've played it, we run out the clock. Half the time it's someone activated the antimatter or had something devour the whole station. And like those moments when they happen just feel very spiky in a way that's really, really fun.
Stationfall is wild. I feel like 2 turns into the game, someone is like, well, the game has 4 more turns left because the XYZ is about to blow up.
Another game that does this, that is, I don't think not as fun or as exciting as Stationfall, but maybe a lot of people played it, is Seven Wonders Duel, where generally that game is going to end based on points, but it can end with a decisive military or science victory at any time.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, similar in the same vein of, like, you have to be keeping your eye on all of those, like, win conditions.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to get got.
Yeah. And so another type of game and trigger, which is sort of akin to hitting a victory point total, are racing games where you have a clear target you're trying to get to. It may not be victory points, but it's usually like a physical location on the board or something like that. As a general sports fan, I'm always a fan of racing games or competing for a goal line. So that's a system that I've always enjoyed or tend to enjoy.
Yeah, this has also become one for me that I appreciate more and more when I see a game do it, just because it's different from like your average victory point game, but it does just add like a very easy, like, hey, this is how you win. You get to here first and you've won. And I always love a game where you can clearly state like the way it ends and how you win in like 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of scope in that for lots of different designs. Like Quest for El Dorado, one of my favorite games, is by all other metrics a deck builder, but it is a deck builder where you're racing, and that is great.
You also have, however, the variant that Kellen is not going to like when it comes to racing games. I'm guessing he's not going to like this, but the idea that it's not the person who crosses it first. It's like crosses it and then equal number of turns, and then if it's multiple people have crossed the line, whoever gets farther wins. Kellen, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah. It's not who climaxes first, it's who goes the farthest.
Climaxes, you mean by like hitting the top of the mountain, right?
Yeah, I'm at the top of the mountain and I'm only halfway up. I think the real answer is that a lot of these get frustrating based on the design and just being, it's like a very, very Euro game needs like a round structure, right? Because you need to know how many turns you can do to get stuff done. And then a game where you can like either elongate or shorten that is antithetical. How's that for a pronunciation? Antithetical to what the game is, which is, build your spreadsheet, execute your spreadsheet. And again, I like some of those games. So there are games where it has this nice round, everybody gets X number of turns, totally fine. It's just when it's applied to a different kind of game that like people get frustrated or annoyed. But that's sometimes where the best games are, right? Because, Archipelago is a fairly heavy Euro game if you want it to be, with also really weird and spiky endgame stuff. Scythe is a efficiency optimization Euro game that is actually a race game, and some people don't like that part about it because it feels like they're constantly under this pressure where they don't get to achieve all the objectives that they set out to do, and when they chose Crimea and combined it with whatever they did. There are also like area control games, right, which have victory conditions that I find sometimes kind of boring. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but there are ones that go like more round based and it's less about sort of conquering the land. But again, the opposite of that is like Risk, where it's like, my God, the game just goes so much longer than it needs to because you got to get to world domination,
Yeah.
Area control games that spend too much time focused on victory points suffer a little bit for me, and in some ways like Blood Rage, right? Could be a good example for me. Other people really like it, where, so much of the game isn't necessarily about conquering the board. It's just about getting the most points and getting the most points in the 3 rounds. And it's like, I would prefer the game being about conquering the
Yggdrasil.
Where are we in?
Yggdrasil.
Yeah, I won't say that.
I think that all makes a lot of sense. I think that sometimes when you mismatch what is not thematically so much, but you mismatch the way that you think or assume a game should feel with the way that the end trigger is constructed, that sometimes feels the worst.
To that point, I think like one problem with the instant trigger ending the game, as Kellen enjoys, is that sometimes, I've been there with games where that happens, which I agree is super exciting, but people will then say it gives too much advantage to the first player, where, presumably that's been worked out in other ways, or just the fact that I didn't get to do one thing which caused me to lose. That is a complaint that I've heard a lot, where it's like people will tend to believe that will like make them lose when they otherwise wouldn't have. Either they're surprised, or it means the person who got the most actions won, the first player presumably. So that, I think that's a potential, at least perceived problem with that. So then, to answer Kyle's question in general, when it comes to game triggers that are determined by players, do you think it's generally a player problem or design problem? I think obviously it depends on the game. You're going to get situations where it's probably a poor design, and then probably play that is not fun. But yeah, I think in general I would go with player problem. I generally enjoy games where players have control of the ending, and you can figure out like, hey, am I in a position where I want to rush it, or am I in a position where I want to drag it down, or am I in a position where I need to strike at a certain time? I generally like that.
Yeah, it's hard because it's easy to construct scenarios where players playing suboptimally can like effectively not ruin a design. That's maybe a little bit hard,
Mess
but
up the
like
experience, at least.
Mess up the experience. Exactly. A lot of games that should at some point have a very finite end can theoretically go on forever. Scythe is a good example of that. But you're assuming that people are playing with some intent of knowing what they're trying to aim for strategically. If the game is still not landing in a satisfying conclusion, then I would say that obviously is a design problem. But yeah, I would say that most of the time that it ends up being people playing suboptimally more than anything.
So that is going to do it for our discussion of endgame triggers, and that's going to do it for the show. I would love if you went to our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord, go to our podcast channel, and tell us maybe your favorite game end triggers, maybe generally or specifically, which games do you like in terms of the way that they trigger the end of the game. Again, you can do that at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord, and our discussion is usually in the podcast channel for that week's episode. You can also find us on all forms of social media, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff, or X, I guess we should be calling it now. Mr. Branding, what do you think about the Twitter to X thing?
No comment.
Okay, great. You can reach us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com if you want to leave us a message, or if you want to leave us a topic, again, go to boardgamebarrage.com/topics and leave an idea there. We plumb those depths quite often, so we would love to hear from you. Plumb the depths, right? Nealon, back me up on that. You plumb depths. Yeah,
that works.
Okay. Kellen was looking at me like I was... Thank you as always to Heart Society for our intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid? And until next time, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Right.
285, right?
Yeah.
Clap. 3, 2, 1. Felt like Kellen was slow on that one. We'll see what the tape says, but I'm already threw it off there. I also didn't get a chance to do that new thing I learned about clapping in the last episode where I did the warm-up claps. Remember last time when I think Neelan was counting them off, I was able to do a practice claps, like my 3, 2, 1, they were all practice claps.
I don't remember this at all. I don't know.
I feel like my timing was perfect. I think maybe because I just edited the episode, I remember that very clearly. But anyhow. All right.
Isn't the banter all start sounding the same, like in the upfronts? We repeat jokes about numbers and clapping and
No, we don't repeat stuff.
Actually, that's a funny question. What is the most boring part of the edit? And I mean in terms of the actual listening back to the tape part.
What segment or what?
Yeah, where it was just oh, I can't believe I have to listen to this. The upfront or the end or the tail or the mid cap.
Segment is definitely a better thing to answer than person. Right?
Yeah.
You could answer.
I would agree with that. I think probably the most boring are when I'm describing a game because to nail down a person because
yeah, it's one that you've heard yourself say. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the worst.
That's funny.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. 285, right?
But who the likes action programming? First of all, so in Robot Quest, hi, Misty Boo. Hi.
Aw.
Hi. You want to come up? Okay.
Aw.
The good news is with COVID, I can't taste anything or smell anything. So she I can't smell her breath. Stupid dog. What are you doing?
Oh.
Too much jumping. Bye, Misty Moo. All right. Okay. So this is a fairly traditional.
You can have nuclear proliferation